culture, adventure, and the impact of martial arts. That's what we look at here at Kung Fu Podcast. I'm your host, T.W. Smith, and we're at episode number 10. And today we're going to be looking at the role of gladiators in cinema, in mixed martial arts, and UFC. This show is designed for practitioners of martial arts of all kinds and systems, whether you practice for your health, whether you practice for show, or if you practice for fighting. Doesn't matter. What does matter is you know which one you're practicing for. Let's take a moment and consider two men are facing off in a large group of spectators. Blood's flowing, conflict's happening, and we're looking at two studs, two alpha males going at it. They have intimidating nicknames. Women throw themselves at them. And during the course of this conflict, if necessary, by raising your hand, you can signal defeat. Was I just describing gladiators or the UFC, MMA? The similarities will not be so stunning once we look at the history of them both. It was once said that men give them their souls and women give them their bodies. That was spoken about the gladiators a long time ago. Cinematic representations of ancient Roman gladiators and martial art movies have developed the UFC and the MMA into what we see today. You start off with just the most epic of scenes, The Return of the Dragon, 1972, Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris. That whole scene took place in the Rome Colosseum, and it was not by accident, by any stretch. It was purely by design. And you can see some of the images that I'm looking at. Download the PDF and all that from the White Bamboo Store. All the links are there on our webpage. It's important in this moment for me to take a pause and give thank you to Mr. Daniel Bolelli. This particular podcast I got through his permission, based on the summarization of an essay he wrote, How Gladiatorial Movies and Martial Arts Cinema Influenced the Development of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The link to the 18-page PDF file essay is there on the website, and you can go to it and look at the whole thing if you want to. And as a reminder, if you have books or essays that you would like for me to review, or if you have a website or other content that you want to turn into audio, send me an email, kungfupodcast.com/contact, and let's talk about it so that I can do what I can to support you all who are doing good work out there in the field of martial arts. Rorion Gracie noticed that many Americans enjoyed arguing which style of martial arts is best. Now, he used this to match one style against another in a tournament setting. Coming out the other end of this tournament was your ultimate champion. Now, he had some thoughts in his mind. First was to make sure that ground fighting got some respect and had a good chance of succeeding against cinematic martial art practitioners. Gracie hired assistance from creative cinema director and writer to put it together, Mr. John Milius. He had helped direct and write and do some work on Conan, Red Dawn, and he wrote the first two Dirty Harrys, which makes me a fan of him already. And he was named the creative director of the UFC. Using the cage was Mr. Milius's idea because the ring that was being used in wrestling and boxing had become too familiar. He wanted to add flair. The cage added this sense of barbaric touch that he wanted, and it certainly did the trick. Now, through the end of this tournament, Rorion basically put it all together. He had the cinematic practitioners coming out there, getting their little fannies whipped by his brother, younger brother, Royce, who came out the champion, I think, once or twice. Everything was heading in the right direction until political backlash. It was called barbaric, a blood sport, and brutal. And because of politics, UFC got blacklisted from cable. So they were no longer mainstream, but they didn't give up. The UFC took a new family-friendly approach, but still used gladiator images in all of its promotions. First thing they did was they went and got regulated by the athletic commissions of the states, which made them legal, but it didn't make them mainstream. UFC President Dana White, name sounds familiar, created a reality TV show, The Ultimate Fighter. Now, this little TV show, the media exposure, is what got UFC back into the mainstream again. So now they were legal and they were mainstream. Fighters were then encouraged to become more entertaining if they wanted the big payday. In fact, several of them were denied contracts because they were good fighters, but they were not entertaining. They were not exciting enough to be a part of the ring. Now, in 2003, the famous Karate Kid pose was taken by Mr. Ludwig to start the third round of a battle against Mr. Sudo. The crowd roared in its approval. As the match turns out, the judges awarded Mr. Ludwig the victory. Whether it had to do anything with the crowd support or not, it was certainly there. On the website in PDF file, you will see a link or two there. One is the Dana White biography and MMA. And then there's also UFC fighting events. That's one for Amazon. And I do appreciate you using our links for any shopping you might do at Amazon or iTunes. That really helps us out a little bit here and there. So here we are, gladiators in cinema, their roles and their presence and influence being brought into the UFC utilizing it, doing pretty well with it. They get blacklisted, but then they come back. They recognize that they have to have more exciting and entertaining type of fights. It begins to develop a relationship between martial arts, the sport, MMA, UFC, and the cinema. And the relationship between these three continues even today. You'll find things like The Expendables, where they actually hire a bunch of former or current MMA, UFC practitioners to come in and choreograph the scenes and putting things together. You'll find that a lot of them are working on things, well, like The Warrior, the movie Cradle to the Graves, and a bunch of other movies at this point. Now, as a personal note, when the UFC and all was just starting, many of my classmates back in those days were Deltas and Special Forces guys, and they had free access to this sport style, but they wouldn't practice it, and they wouldn't go to it because they said that it was impractical for a fighting soldier, and it would get them killed in the field. The emphasis of one-on-one sports and rules does not exist in real combat. We were always told, you will fight how you have practiced. So we practiced hard, and it got rough. You will not rise to the occasion, but you will default to the level of your training. That's a standard law enforcement and military personnel mantra, that when things come to push and shove, you will rely instinctively on how you have practiced. We've looked at the history of cinema with Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, gladiators with nicknames, and that's actually very, very cool stuff. You can look at that PDF file and go back to the historical references of some of the cool nicknames a lot of the gladiators had. And how it was all put together and moving forward into hiring people in the cinema, then the cinema hiring those people, the relationship becomes reciprocal. But remembering the differences between when we're practicing for sport, when we're practicing for real-life combat, for health, or for show. As we were saying earlier, it doesn't matter which one you practice for as long as you know which one you're practicing. Thank you so much for joining us at KungFuPodcast.com. I'm your host, T.W. Smith. I appreciate you listening, subscribing, and your reviews there, no matter whether it's iTunes or Stitchers or if you're just downloading them at the site. Thank you so much. This has been episode number 10, looking at the history and the influence of gladiators in cinema in the UFC and martial arts. Take care, have a great practice today, and do your best.